And with that, I will now introduce our speakers, Tshaukuesh, Elizabeth Penashue, and Elizabeth Yeoman. Tshaukuesh Elizabeth Penashue was a leader of the Innu campaign against NATO low-level flying and weapons testing on Innu land in the 1980s and 1990s. Her diaries from that period to 2016 were translated into English and published in 2019 as a book, Nitinikiau in Innusi, I Keep the Land Alive. She will never give up her work protecting the land, the water, the animals, the trees, the children, and everything in the circle of life. Elizabeth Yeoman is a retired professor of education at Memorial University. She was a co-editor and co-translator of Tshaukuesh's Nitinikiau Innusi, and I Keep the Land Alive, 2019, and is also the author of a book about what she learned from the experience, exactly what I said, translating words and worlds, which was just published this year. The authors will speak about their books and their experience of working together. Tshaukuesh will focus on her continuing work protecting Innu land and culture, and Elizabeth will discuss themes from her book, including mapping, walking, and photography, and aspects of translation. By the way, the University of Manitoba is offering a 30% discount to any members of the audience who buy either or both books between now and January 1st. You can buy the book with the discount between tonight and January the 1st using the coupon code ALIVE30 for I Keep the Land Alive, and exactly 30 for exactly what I said. And the publisher's website is www.uofmpress.ca. And I was hoping that we might be able to post that discount information on our website, but we'll look into that. So I now pass the evening over to Tshaukuesh, Elizabeth Penashue, and Elizabeth Yeoman and their presentation. Tshaukuesh and Elizabeth Yeoman talk about their books. So Tshaukuesh is going to speak first, and her daughter, Kanani Davis, who's sitting there on the screen behind Tshaukuesh, she'll translate. I believe Tshaukuesh is going to speak in Yeoman, and Kanani will translate. Okay, Tshaukuesh.
Mr. Jemonis to what we have done it, it's negated saying Mac Esquas that Sene no stain to what no stain. Escu that the stranger should we ain't no budget in the man. Did you want to know in budget now? Only Escuni met them in all within one is fish. We start within one, stays within one. Guys, you didn't know. Came out then, we'll go what's it? She says she still does a lot of things and she finds it very hard to let it go. She'd like to keep going with teaching and protecting the land and showing children, showing her grandchildren how the Innu culture, how to teach the Innu way of life. You got double then what was it you want to go? Eshkuni what new and then I would need them when you what you told me. Ninvo to pet budget then Eshwandish. And you want new jet told that you can't double then what you want to go at minutes. She said, I'm really hoping that, they won't give up. The children won't give up because she said, it does get hard at times, she said, but I want to continue to teach the kids, teach the children that never give up on what you like to do, what you believe in. Den nation one wish can am one and bit you guys I understand generation there's no the nation one wish can am more with me not need to pass to one to see with most of it. The mistakes but then the one in no wish can am more generation and you guys that's the wee bit in the quite to actual mean go no with the seems. Yeah, she said she follows and she's still doing the things that her ancestors were doing, like her parents and her grandparents. She still likes to continue that, and because she doesn't want that to be lost. So that's why she loves to teach that to the children, because this comes from generations from way back, and she don't want that to be lost. Is going to see who is going to see who when they get met. Maar net met heel mooi de manier maakt en je het het zijn beter dat het zijn. Me change church wanted to one ke pocket na or the snow no television news machine because no kon ka bete dia. Es kon you na be ma monte to say that mamu. Gajin but yet the forbidden meshkano. At Gajin but nabe. Ah shish. It thought my jivan one and abe mesh when you. And tamno ichigo and mamu to the danjo. Gajin but yet the mutenya the meshkana. She said, you've seen many things, even on television. She said that the things that she's done, and the things that she's fought for, and the things that she's taught many people and young children. She said her husband was still alive when she was still doing this, being out on the land, and her husband was her #1 supporter, always helping and always continuing to help her on her walks and on her trips. And even after her husband passed away, she said she still continues to be on the land and teach and continue the inner way of life. Photo t-shirt na nabe mesh kwenyu ja photo t-shirt che punina potaya when je photo t-shirt. Just saying mukta ungi man stop mukta esh why to the wish why jim inno was esh what to manage for masi photo t-shirt che punina gatayan the pian photo t-shirt saying mukta demo. She said her husband has never said to her, stop what you're doing, or even like after he passed, before he passed, like he never said that she should stop doing what she does, because she knows that her husband was very supportive, and that her husband wanted her to continue the inner way of life and continue teaching the children. Me change one I thought one the mashkan the budget mashkanat no mote ni mashway the magono no portion is not ten on a papam yeah treat one ote I thought that sure most seen teacher state of city teacher. She says she's done many things. For example, like her walks that she's used to do annually, and her canoe trips down Churchill River. Every year she used to do that as well. And then walking on the highway and protesting against the government, how the government has treated Innu people. There's so many things she said she has done over the years. Muuten jätetty tosiaan tuontu tuontu 1 month. Eessä kun ihan muuten innot nyt juot makagni jo mitedna. Nän dedisymstämisä support. Innot nyt juot kun misät support agni jo mitedtive. Ösi tosiaan tuontu 1 month.
She's walked many places. She said she's walked in Toronto and also in Ottawa, and sometimes it would take them months to walk, and that was to protest against the government.
Wet magun kuya ne te atuaga jitunya nishi no skot magani haskot. Nishi bani no skot ma nishi bani na put. Ne utan mamu miagun kuya. Mus tos kuidan di jeven. Miskaden de di speciatia. Mutta magun kuya no atua. Mukiat no kuku jeven da ihan no jega magun no tan mo je do da kuya. Maar iaten no kuku jeven da ne des kuya. Ne wipen. En te gajito kunya da do.
Well, she says she's also been like arrested a few times for protecting and protesting. One of the walks they did in Ottawa is when they arrived in Ottawa during a protest. She was arrested. She said there was 2 Innu women and 2 non-Innu. 4 of them got arrested that day when they arrived in Ottawa.
Essa kun di homagna muttena no jido de tato 1 month essa kun jigo. To no ma joga me punya foto bajete no dia.
She said the walk that they did in Ottawa, it took a long time to get there. But she said they had they had a hard time during the walk, but they still never gave up. They still continued to walk.
En kun ne koitten tämän jäsumsta me santa tosen to kuin ta. Ne patuten misneigen misko kun jewiji. Intendina usamnan tamil misneigen janan ta pempejan misneigen ja asu later na kwagite biskali. Wasten vanashkun kechmata. Chegon sitwan jewanga itiaga shiga.
She said this is where the idea came from when she was thinking about writing a book, because she was always writing in journals. She was always making notes so that she don't forget, what had happened that day. Or sometimes she said it'd be late at night and she would be in her tent and she would get a candle, light it up, and she'd still write late at night because she didn't want to forget while it was still fresh in her mind. So she always wrote in her journal. So she had so many, journal entries and writing in her diaries, and she had hoped that one day that her book would be published of all the journal writing she's been doing.
Antoine Quenchevich, Secretary Wemsco, Gomesco Elizabeth Yeoman, Gomesco to Egypt. She germs the state of Senanda doing agony from Winja, and in Inno, gave one down in Hostan, a green, that's not all guide you. One of Mr. Cochavan Dananji, the store brother.
She said she had looked for somebody to help her. She didn't know where to go to find help, and who would help her with a book, who would write her book, because everything she wrote was in Yeoman. It was in her language. So it took a while, she said, to really find somebody committed and dedicated to sit down and go through her journals and and write it in English. Because she said when she found Elizabeth and asked Elizabeth, and Elizabeth said that she would help my mom. She would help mom with her book, and mom said because she wrote in Innu and she speaks Innu, Elizabeth only speaks English. So in a way, she said it kind of worked out. She tried to explain her journal writing to Elizabeth, and Elizabeth would write it in English.
The Pegagene want that. Last mine I showed all each of the stroke on a hand. I would charge of and did that touch of attack the bottom. Last Spanish guardian is stroke.
She would tell Elizabeth, like mom's writing, she would talk to Elizabeth about her writing and what was in her journal. And she wanted Elizabeth to make sure she understood what she was trying to say in English, because mom was reading in Innu, but then she would translate what she was trying to say. And sometimes she would use an explanation of something, like she would take a stick and explain about their canoe trip and the area they were in. So she really wanted to make sure that Elizabeth Yeoman understood her journal, her writing. She said it was important to her to write the book so that people don't forget the Innu way of life, or her story, her life story. So she was very happy when it was published, so that now it can be in the schools and that children can read this, students can read this and know, the hardships and the hard work that the Innu people, that they did throughout the years.
Agni Hochi Tata Inimusi, 1% the Manuani. Kajichi Tata Yet, Togan the Stoton, Wab Matogonagan. Gohan send money have a day to save it. He was set at Togan the Stoton. Stand up, Gonagan, he have a day handle. It is that with that. Connoit Mustia, not no Conagana. Unan would know each other, Tagum saying, no, both that Conagan. And the Majin Stodak Agni shop, Asian New York, Gina. And when the store to Moche, Ewa Mat Konakan, in the Bajon, give us the store to a quap petition, but now is my Mishkan with me.
She said she wanted to make sure that there was pictures in her book. She was wanted to make sure that people could see what they did. So that's why she wanted a lot of pictures in her book, and so that people can not only read but see the pictures of the work that they've done in the past years.
Stage for 10 again, Stumland, and I got GG stand, everything, get the trend is come on, you have it. they're going to start the money and he was going to start it in precies in the start it. Well, that's no man be Christiana. Be Christiani chat money in the machine precies in the start it. Kie ejita mo ko again. And they kona no de. And I go ichi to both this. Ske go ichi to when we toga for the mosino. Kona no. We did ne kona no ino. We did na po. Nemma ituane nemma stamsha winter to su. Energy that money I don't start mano. That's mean money ne chita dma. The nabim ewab ma. Especially we supported todo. We can't even go in to so. And while we chita. Big opportunity that was the no man mistake. He magan and started. They're gonna get chita more. Na pem gena sumstemijed na kushet na go icho o megam stuichi to chen no mi chen pasti of the square manyan misho shimon misho what more than hegam stuichi to dino that's nim manjara man.
She said she would like to thank. She's very grateful. She'd like to thank Elizabeth for all her help she's done, helping her, with her book and translating it and putting the pictures on. And Mom said she'll take her book at times when she's home alone, and she'll try to read it, even though she doesn't read English very well. But she'll look at it so many times, and she'll look at the pictures, and sometimes she's almost in disbelief herself, all the work that she's done and what she's been through. And she looks at the pictures of her husband that have been a supporter, with all the work that she's done, the walks she's been through and the canoe trips and all that. And she looks at the pictures and she gets so emotional. She said, because in those pictures, she said a lot of them are gone now. Elders are gone. Elders that have been on the mom with mom, either protesting or mom has traveled with them. She mentioned Michel Pastine and his wife, Mary Pastine, yeah, and Marianne Michel, and her husband Simon Michel. So they've all passed. So she looks at the pictures and she gets so emotional because a lot of the elders are now no longer with us. And even the leaders that have now no longer with us, for example, Daniel Ashney and Ben Michel, they helped her a lot, and they invited her, they included her in the fight against the government, the protests. So they were very supportive, and so mom gets very emotional. She said that when she sees pictures of the elders that are no longer with us.
Ettei makaa sinne paja andenemistuiji unanga. Ettei makaa sinne pat. Shaashana stoteu. Miameessa tuoneiden muk puisset muk miameessa tuoneiden muk äänös. Äänestoten pustotada. Putsista ja kauitsita. Siinä mä juitsista. Siinä juitsista. Onko se niin mantisipra? Siinä mä juitsista ei jouduisi. Miameessä tuoneiden mä puisset. Mukaan ekonneisuutta muk. Äänestoten. Putsista ja kauitsita. Muk. Siinä mä juitsista.
She said her older sister, Mary Adele Andrew, she passed away many years ago. She passed away, and she was one of the sisters that have protested with Mom and fought very hard with Mom, stood by Mom a lot. And so when she passed away, it was a huge loss for Mom. She said she feels like Mary Adele, her sister, still talks to her. And when Mary Adele passed, she said she feels like Mary Adele said to her, I'm sorry I couldn't finish the protest with you. I couldn't finish the fight with you. But you continue on, Elizabeth. You continue fighting. And that's what I hear Mary Adele, her sister, saying. That's what she hears her saying, to continue the fight, even though I'm not there.
Anneman kenemis tamskaden de dinan og leitian tjönskaden de. Nas vatta on noin vaji ta tjön vaji. Tjönskaden de nan og leitian. Motiaskan jigo. Se magi tota tisviä. Se mänkä syö. Se menotti syö. Se ei toto tidnossamana. Anneman over. Mutta complaint watchisi kaminoin tumoit. Tämä mun itse mutteiset kennape päivän pemuskäät päivätoja.
She said she thinks about the walk, and it's almost like she said earlier, it's just like disbelief, because she thinks back on it and of all the hardships and the hard work that they did during the walk. She said there was no complaints. There was no complaints because everybody worked together. Everybody helped each other. So on the walks, they would you'd walk all day, and at the end of the day, you'd have to set up the tent and get ready and make sure everybody ate and make sure that everybody was okay. Getting the children to bed. So it was really good. She said it was a lot of work, hard work, but everybody helped each other.
Ja kun tjata makan jisin tuona kanekan tappana akanen mesneijena. Kus noin vaattu muuten, snoa mejoen tuona mistia kun se timantiji. Ja kun enemmän kai ne Joycekin ja kun enemmän ne mistia kun. Ja kun tuollaisen me emme kun Manu vanjetsivat nimistäkusi, petään kuin maakuutti, kemisniitsiän tuotin on maakuutin antiijak. Kas nulle ei tiedä sään magnuskaten de dinan.
She said, "You probably seen my picture where I'm writing, and my hands are bandaged up." She said, "That's after long days of work, and her hands would be dry and chapped and cracked." But she still wanted to continue to write at the end of the day, and then the next day she'd have to tie her toboggan. She said, but she still didn't want to quit. She still wanted to keep going, even though her hands were very, very sore.
Wish would generous the generous touch what the margin at all the man, Eben Sky and given but yet. She joined what the more was the mute more awesome. Jish, Nana would know each other awesome to Penashue. Each could not see the more Jita more. They might put Madame Esh could yet to come in then more. Then ik want dat en als je goed omhoog was het meer was het geen was je maakt want dat je maar betekenen gaat goed maar je nooit.
She's taught many people and children, and not only her grandchildren. She said she's taught many children, and she sees children sometimes out in the woods, and they're doing the things that she's taught them, and it makes her happy to see that they haven't lost the tradition, and she hopes that still continues because her teaching, she's taught so many people and kids, and she wants that to be continued.
Wanneer we storen en dat we nou mooi in de stuur. Na pogade na no show more die wish potenda is we gaan ponden in de patent in de patat die notas sino. Ana mi je potat na po. Ni nan me katta we no te schot ma was. Je sconumani destino de jut abstat. De magita mo a Tshaukuesh on mesa. Questo. Mish tamno into ne paton mish. Mish comit questo. No come pone mish. Penne pato. E when no de scotomat. Kati just not scotomotito. Je was it is remembered nenuji. Je on digression station then that want the new navigation area. I'm gonna mesh the send one me out then one or 20. Then chase bus. The total out show more digit see thought was studied was certain jab started the Deutsch.
She said, I don't know how. I don't know how. What's the word I'm looking for? Said that she hopes that the government. She hoped that the government will stop destroying, or that they start listening. That the government listens. Because she said there's not many of them anymore. There's not very many elders anymore. So who's going to teach the children when we're no longer here? Because learning and practicing and knowing your way of life, knowing your culture is so important. The children need to know this. They need to know their way of life and their culture.
But the way Chito the Otman was una patta non hanno non hanno che scut magia. Mi ha detto che scut do già già stemi già messne che ne abstagano c'è scut man to was. E unina nanto to se vanno patta non Kaç kutumu kovası da tutuyor kovası meşkına da tutuyor kovası. No pat ni otestino şum da aynı menvaşın meşte kuanne pinon tuğuna snotivan. Meş nuna çok notan de çok da maçı hiç kutumadia şaş meş nautona. Mega kutan reden de beigadi. Mr. Mijen misnegen abstaan gotisch goed om te wassen. Evening kan je het goed om te wassen, no te missen je gewoon. De patronen, Shibo, Jimstoga, Meskano. Mesto Strandvane, we have Nedman. Ninta to Seana Portugali.
She said that she said students or education in school, they have their materials where they can learn. But she said, but where she teaches, the government is destroying that. She will no longer be able to teach because she has to go on the land to teach the children the way of life. She said there's roads being built, there's mines being built, dams being built. And she said, and for her to teach children and for her to continue teaching, that's being destroyed. She can no longer go there to do the things that she used to do because it's being destroyed. And that's her classroom, she said. That's where she goes to teach. But if it's no longer there, then her classroom is taken away.
Mia tentawa ma sejede. Mia tentawa na motioto as. Eu shiwa noche. Koto no. Na pomschmat ne biemen argument. Teji mini oni bishabuja. Pomschman stap pristokot bota. Tana chimako mita botoga. Egone tapai gajene na motena no asat no ijo. Ego koto ni shiwen. Eu botoga ne bijem no argument teji menya. Ustende moto asat keni no ustende. Egone evento sivena. Botoga ninta to sevana.
And her last thing she wants to say is that she said, it's like this. She said, imagine I'm taking a group of children. I'm taking a group out on a walk, and we're walking for long, and the children have to eat and they have to drink in order to continue the walk. So we stop to start a fire and to try, feed them and give them something to drink. But she said the water is so polluted here now. What are they going to drink? She said everything is being built here, damaged. You're eventually not going to be able to find wood to start a fire. So how are you supposed to teach the children, and how are you supposed to feed them and give them fresh water because it's being polluted? And that's what upsets her, and it upsets the children, and it's hurting. Okay, Ms. Mullers.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Tshaukuesh. Thank you. So Elizabeth Yeoman is going to say a few words, and she has she has some PowerPoint images to share with us as well. As you heard from Tshaukuesh, pictures are important, and you'll see some wonderful pictures of Tshaukuesh and other people, including the landscape. So Elizabeth, you're going to share your PowerPoint with us. For Elizabeth.
I was just waiting to be unmuted.
Okay, good.
I do not have control over it. Okay, I will share my screen. Back to.
No, you're still showing the thumbnails on the left. Can you use the play button there?
Okay.
Perfect. Okay, good.
All right. So I want to leave plenty of time for questions, so I'm just starting a timer so I can keep an eye on my time. And this is the photo that Tshaukuesh was referring to with her hand bandaged. So as she said, she she not only kept fighting to protect the land and also to teach the children, and still keeps doing those things, but also to document what's happening even under very difficult conditions, as the picture illustrates. So we start there with her. I think that picture really represents her courage and determination. And that's why I chose it for the starting photo. So she and I worked together for almost 10 years, translating and editing her diaries for publication. And she talked about how we didn't really have a common language, which is not so uncommon in translations from Indigenous languages or other languages that are not widely spoken, but it is a big challenge. But as Tshaukuesh also noted, it, in a certain way, she didn't use the word advantage, but there is an advantage to it, I think, that I really had to listen so carefully and spend a lot of time with her, trying to make sure I did understand. Sometimes if we got stuck and didn't feel that I was understanding, Tshaukuesh would phone up Kanani or other people in her family and ask them to explain to me, but we just kept trying and trying to make sure I could understand. She would tell me what was in her diaries, and I would sit there and type and then later edit and go back to her to make sure again. So the process was long, just that, in a way, technical process. But there was so much more to it than that. I also didn't know her world. So it's not just about language, it's knowing her world. And so that's why I suggested to John that in this talk, I would also talk about things like maps, walking together, using photos, and photos. Tshaukuesh also mentioned the importance of the photos, particularly in her book. There are a few in mine too, but they're a very, very important part of her book as a way of showing that world. The subtitle of my book is Translating Words and Worlds, and all of these things were part of that. It wasn't just typing and writing the words. Okay. This is a quotation that I have read towards the beginning of our time working together, and I had it in my mind all the time, partly because it was such a daunting task or challenge to try and do justice to Tshaukuesh's story. So I really liked this quotation and the idea that that gap, which is always there, even if we're speaking the same language, there's always some gap between what one person said and what the other person understands. But that gap is so much vaster between two people speaking different languages and from different cultures. So if you want to just take a moment to read the quotation, because you can read it more quickly yourselves than I can read it out loud. And the picture here, which on my screen is slightly covered by some of the thumbnails, unfortunately, but is a beautiful picture by Ryan Wood of Tshaukuesh's tent out in Newfoundland. And I'll talk a bit more about that word Newfoundland in a minute. Anyway, by night with the incredible stars that you see there, because there's Tshaukuesh mentioned some kinds of pollution, but there isn't light pollution, and so the stars you see are just incredible. It's so beautiful. When Tshaukuesh and I started working together, she gave me a note explaining that it was okay for me to edit her writing and use different words than the ones she was using in speaking to me, but it still had to mean exactly what she said. So apart from that previous quotation I showed you about how a gap can be a creative space, these words from Tshaukuesh herself were in my mind constantly. You can use other words, but it has to mean exactly what I said. And how do you do that when you're translating not just words, but worlds. So I always had that in my mind too, that question, how am I going to do that? So I suppose all translators to some extent think about translating not just words, but worlds. But this was a world I didn't know myself, and a vastly different one from the worlds that I knew best. So walking together on the land and looking at maps and photos became vital parts of the translation process. But before getting to mapping, walking, and well, it's already about photos because I'm showing you some photos. This one by Jerry Kobalenko, who came on Tshaukuesh's walk the same year that I did, and it shows the Akami Wapishk, or the Mealy Mountains, which I'll say a little bit more about later. I'm just going to give you two examples of translation challenges. Nitasinan is the word for the Innu homeland that is now, although only relatively recently, I think, but quite widely used outside, not only Innu, but a lot of non-Innu use that word to refer to Innu territory, Nitasinan. But Tshaukuesh herself often uses the word Innusi, which my understanding is, and please correct me, Kanani or Tshaukuesh, if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that for most younger Innu, Innusi tends to mean the reserve or the village, whereas Nitasinan means all of their territory. But it literally means Innu land, Innu Asi. You can see the word Asi both in Asinan, Nitasinan, and in Innu Asi. So it's their land. In Quebec, those two words also have a legal meaning, with Nitasinan meaning the entire territory, and Innusi or Innuasi meaning just the local community. Innusi is the word that Tshaukuesh chose for her book title. And one thing I liked about it is that for non-Innu, it does make the word Innu visible. And so I tend to say Innusi because Nitasinan means our land and it's not my land. So I personally feel kind of more comfortable saying Innusi. Okay. Did I get that more or less right? Got any in my explanation there? Oh, sorry.
Maybe they were muted.
I think she's oh, maybe she can't unmute. She nodded, so I think it was okay. I think.
Okay.
If you want to clarify in the question period after, you can. And the other, there are many words that were very challenging to translate, but I'm just giving two examples here. This is the other one, Nojmit, which Tshaukuesh herself, when speaking English, sometimes says in the bush, in the country, which I think recognizes some of the challenge that she just kind of incorporates two different possible translations. Other ones that I've heard are on the land, in the wilderness, which is an interesting word that I've written a lot more about in my book, that word wilderness and wild, or simply inland as opposed to on the coast. NATO referred to Nojmit as uninhabited land, and then when the Innu challenged them on that, when they were protesting against NATO low-level flying and weapons testing on Innu land, they said, it's not uninhabited, it's our land and we live here. So then NATO changed what they said to more specifically a place where there are no permanent dwellings, which is kind of a meaningless definition for people who are moving around on the land and who historically have been nomadic. Oh, I made a spelling mistake. Oh, it's actually, I did not make a spelling mistake. I added in Tanyan Ashini's name at the last minute and autocorrect changed it. But it should be Daniel or Tanyan Ashini, who Tshaukuesh also mentioned, who was one of the leaders with her in the campaign against NATO occupation of Innu land. And he had said in an interview that to many Innu people, this word means a place where they are at home. So a completely different kind of definition from in the wilderness or uninhabited land. It's a place where Innu are at home. Okay, so now I will get to what I said I would talk about, place names, maps, and walking as forms of translation. Okay. How am I for time? Okay, I guess. So Indigenous place names reflect the culture and history of a place and also document its geography. So they're an important part of mapping. They are a form of mapping. And I highly recommend the wonderful website innuplaces.ca if you're interested in knowing more about that. In 2015 only, quite recently, hundreds of Innu place names were finally made official in this province, although Peter Penashue pointed out in a recent interview that they still aren't very visible. We don't see a lot of signs with their place names. And even when they are, oh yeah, I want to show you the next slide now. They're often less obvious than the English name. So this is a poster that's really quite a beautiful poster, but you can see that the Innu and Inuktitut names are in smaller letters than the English names. And yet it's rare to see them on official signs at all. And this is not official, it's a company that makes posters, but I just thought it was an interesting example where they have recognized the Innu name, but in smaller letters. I think the designers could do better there. Parks Canada, in their own website, did a bit better because they put the Innu name first, and they put all three names, Innu, Inuktitut, and English, in the same size font. So, you know, slowly we're getting there, but it seems to be a long process. Okay, so we had to make a map for Elizabeth's book. And show the places that she talked about in her book. I should have mentioned also that I alternate a bit between Elizabeth and Tshaukuesh. Between ourselves, I usually call her Tshaukuesh, but if I say, partly because it's confusion, because my name is also Elizabeth, but sometimes I call her Elizabeth too. So for Elizabeth's book, we made this map. Well, it was actually made by Peter Jackson, but we made the original for it, and then he made it into a more artistic rendition. But we spent a few days crawling around on our hands and knees on the floor with giant government maps, and then drawing a map from them, showing all the places that were in her book. And we decided to use mostly Innu names, and to really make visible an Innu world for her book. So that's the map. I also mentioned the importance of walking together. There's a Stan Rogers song, Northwest Passage, which probably many of you know. It's a beautiful song. Former Prime Minister Stephen Harper called it Canada's alternative national anthem. And the astronaut Chris Hadfield said this was his wake-up music on the day he became the first Canadian to perform a spacewalk. But there is a disturbing line in the song describing European explorers as, quote, tracing one warm line through a land so wide and savage to the sea, as if no one else had been there, when of course Indigenous peoples had been tracing countless lines for thousands and thousands of years. The anthropologist Hugh Brody, in his book about mapping, described how a Dene man, when Hugh Brody asked him to draw on a map all the places that he had walked on his land, he exclaimed, too many, too many. It was impossible for him to draw them all. He had walked everywhere on the land. More recently, Indigenous people have also used walks as protests, and Tshaukuesh mentioned several of the protests that she led using walking as their means of protesting, walking hundreds of miles. And there are many other Indigenous walks as well, which I talk about in more detail in my book. But for example, in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and New England, and Ontario and Quebec, actually, walks to protect water, to try and protect water, or the Indigenous walk from Northern Ontario to Ottawa by the Kichinamaikusib Ininuuk, who walked to protest that although they had jurisdiction over the surface of their land, mining companies could come in and dig mines without even asking their permission. So these are just a couple of examples, but there have been many, many indigenous walks and many Innu walks, quite a few of which were led by Tshaukuesh. And I would argue that others that she didn't actually lead herself were nevertheless inspired by her work. Okay, so now I just have a few pictures of her walks.
Mhm.
And the final thing I wanted to talk about before I end is photography as a kind of translation. And I'll try and be quick so that I leave lots of time for questions. Photography was another way of understanding and translating Tshaukuesh's world. Oops, next slide, I think. No, not yet, sorry. Her book is full of beautiful photos to help readers understand, and they also help me to learn more as we work together on the translation. They do something else as well. They show the beauty and richness of life, of Innu life. This idea of documenting damage versus documenting abundance comes from Unangak's scholar Eve Tuck, who talked about that, how so much research about Indigenous people and Indigenous communities documented damage. And there is a place for that, but she argued that although often it was done with good intentions and to try and get reparations, often the reparations didn't end up happening anyway, and the people whose damage had been documented were left with a narratives of despair, really. And that she suggests that there's a need for more narratives of abundance. So I would say that a lot of Tshaukuesh's book is a narrative of abundance, and in particular, the photos are. She talked often about how she wanted, in particular, to show how happy people are on the land, and especially how happy the children are on the land. So having said that, though, there was a need to document damage as well. So I first want to show you a couple of photos of documenting of damage. This is one of Innu children. This is from the 90s, showing signs that were put there by the military on their land saying, you don't come on this land because we're testing weapons here. And the second example of documenting damage was a photo that they took of, you can see a fighter plane in the sky over Innu land, over the Mishtashipu River. What these photos did, though, they were taken by Innu people, for Innu people, and they led to growing strength and strong alliances, which were also documented. So, for example, this photo by Tshaukuesh's friend Kari Reynolds documents the first time that Innu and Inuit got together to protest, in this case, the development of a mine at Voisey's Bay. This is one, and another example of how documenting damage led to building alliances. A picture of Tshaukuesh, I believe one of the first times that she spoke publicly, and one of the first times that the Innu women were invited to meetings with outsiders. So building strength was the purpose of the photos documenting damage. But then, one more I want to talk about. This one is of Tshaukuesh outside the camp that they set up on the land that the military had occupied. And it had a really useful and interesting purpose as we worked together. It's just one example again, but because when she looked at the photo again, I think, having maybe not seen it for quite a long time, she remembered all kinds of things and was able to tell me a lot more information than what was in the diary about what had happened and where the military were in relation to the photo and what they had done the night before. So photos, in terms of doing historical research, can be very important in helping people remember things, in documenting more detail, and in generating stories. But as I mentioned, one thing Tshaukuesh talked a lot about as we worked together was the importance of showing how happy people are in Nojimit, and especially children. So I thought I'd end with a few of the photos that we used to that end. This first one is in my book. I think it's just a beautiful photo. It was taken by a teacher in Natwashish, Tshaukuesh, and of two little girls just laughing in delight as they play on the beach in Natwashish. And then 3 or 4 photos from Tshaukuesh's book of her grandchildren and other children on walks that she led, and just showing that's Tshaukuesh hiding behind Monteo in this photo as they were traveling. And this one of 2 more of her grandchildren just playing happily on the land. You can just see in the faces how happy they are, right? So they are really narratives of abundance, I would say, told through photography. And this one's kind of interesting. They're more serious here, and they appear to be doing their schoolwork in the tent, but it's all part of life on the land. So, and the last one I want to end with is another one by Jerry Kobalenko, of one of Tshaukuesh's grandchildren walking on the land. And I'll just end by saying that her walk and all her work has inspired a new generation to continue the walk. And I think this picture symbolizes that they're still walking.
Good.
Thank you.
Good, that's terrific, Elizabeth. And Tshaukuesh, and Elizabeth's going to get rid of the PowerPoint now, and so we can all see one another.
Okay.
Okay, so it's up to the people there to decide whether you want the gallery feature or not. But so now this is a chance for members of the audience either to make a comment or ask a question, either through the raised hand function or through the chat line. There are a number of chat line questions or comments already posted there. I'll leave it to Leah if there's something that is appropriate now that the presentation is over. Some of the comments were made during the course of the presentation, and sometimes it was just people saying they had to leave because of other commitments. But Leah, do you have a comment there from the chat line?
Yes. Just a moment. Let me just scan through here. Thank you for your passion, commitment, and hard work in getting recognition and dignity for the Innu culture and history. Is there a transition of leadership by women in your culture? Did you have any connection with the Moravians or the Grenfell mission in your youth?
Okay, I'm going to let Kanani interpret that comment for Tshaukuesh so that she can answer it properly. Can you let...
Yeah, you can unmute yourself.
You can unmute yourself there, Kanani? Yeah. Okay, good. Okay.
Negatosto matat si totne jine wasiris to na I je simodino ko bo himomino was good missionary they had Kemanene I Labrador. What's it again? Labrador.
Is there a tradition of leadership by women in your culture? Is the first part of the question. And then the second part is, did you have any connection with the Moravians or the Grenfell mission in your youth?
Grenfell. Was could you know in Tabanda Scotty do which Maui did it when you know this the new nostok. No nomina de which Miss Mother's table, the better was you still Jacob with you know I see about Moravians, you know that. Magneto Grenfell had their Grenfell like they went to have a bump and dana creation. What did I see me or my no not thought.
No, just she took that pan, I'm start man. Can I see me in North Yarish Penny? What is she? I want to know Jamoy, but that's good stuck. What's it to watch? What did you do? The one going to see her though, the total on it. So he's the better was you in stuck. The Chacon Jamoy, but not energy. She joined no jar. With no more than one school that is a photo that in no small photo that in no nation. We know school have people mammo and what will happen in year and what we the school. The monopony, I see her though.
She said years ago when she was young, she remembers women having a lot of say, because back then there was no such thing as like a leadership government or chief back then. So the women, like her mom, had a lot of say. They would get together with other women, or for example, she said her father would listen to her mom. So women were I guess I don't know if you call it leadership, or they were.
But not to praat over, ja, we respect to praat over. We must see her go, we must see her go. We respect to praat over.
Yeah. So she said there was a lot of respect, and they would listen. Women listened to each other. There was no like one was better, one was, they all listened to each other and respected decisions. As for the Moravians, no, she don't remember having any contact or seeing any Moravians. With the Grenfell, she said the only one she remembers seeing is Dr. Patton, who made trips to the Inuit communities and would come to the Inuit tents.
Thank you. And then Bruce Bork asks, are Innu children taught Inuaman in any formal way, such as in school?
Right now or back then?
I think right now.
Yeah, they are taught Inuimun in some classes.
And Emily Doyle says, thank you. I look forward to sharing your story with my children. And Carolyn says, thank you, and asks, what changes would you like to see with the post-secondary experience so that it is culturally safer for Innu young people?
In post-sec, what do you mean, in education?
I guess in high school?
High school? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, university, college level. Yeah.
Okay.
Not the work up at the what was it, you know, what that. No good that you want to go, Mr. Chudma, to go to store, which there, you know, what that. No, you know, why you could manage it. But I'm not in Gigi. No good that. Give I'm not there, garbage at the I didn't know what's why we don't get the way he was you yet, the way you yet. The to see and no Jamaican to send that or see why we don't. Not good that. No good that, you know. She want to go, Mr. Chudman.
Mananya si honino de Gigi was it when the pony to what is I'm not the Gigi was and they're going to stitch with the Mahnana yo. Gigi took work, Gigi was it, you know. And the pony that is with my well, one of Chanel's one, the mom did one of the things one of the things she said is she would like to see our young children moving forward and going on to pursue further education so that they can come back in their communities. Some could be environmentalists, nurses, and she said we need those Innu get their education and come back and work for us.
Thanks. And Marilee Pittman asks, what do you know about the story of your birth?
Much sending much sending that the Bajmon guy knew in stock. The bit guy knew the guy knew in the not the Bajmon stock.
No, Jimmy knew nothing, didn't know Jimmy. Oh, put that is school. But you got one in Mugui John, no go put on doing. Put that is school. The cat that was a teacher and the roti don't go on his can do this. Give put that is school. No doubt, Niggy wasn't yet, no doubt. No station in just sit man in the middle and there. Guy Niggy, no doubt.
She said, yeah, she said she was born in Nujimit, out on the land. And she said, I guess where it was so far away that there was no, medical help or anything like that. There was only one tent where she was born, and she said it was her father that delivered, helped her mom when she was born. So she said when she heard that story, when she was told that story, she said she was very proud that her father was there to deliver her, help her mom.
No, don't sit in Jabjan, or we did that. I was sitting when I would go there. I knew yet. The man who she wouldn't know Jimmy, they knew yet. But out for near to a she said, Penashue, she said, stumbling down all they knew it.
That's what she thinks about when she's in it, and when she's in a tent. She thinks about when she was born. It was probably like this. It's so nice and calm, and the animals around you, and it's just so peaceful.
And then she should there's a bit of it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So Bill English asks, says thank you for sharing with us. I am wondering if there is another book yet to come from both or either Elizabeth.
Bill English was
What do you think, Tshaukuesh?
Bill said, she said, if you spoke Innu, you'd be helping me write another book.
Tshaukuesh, John Joy here. I was just thinking, I mean, your book ended with your journal entries at 2017. So there must be another 20 years to go before you're done. So you got another 20 years of journals, maybe 2 books.
I also think a book about animals, stories about animals, would be a good book that you could do.
No way she hit one. Elizabeth Yeoman, way she hit. Mange John Joyce, the Mastin, Jamaica, wrote the men. As we have to reach it at the Bajamon, just not the Jamaican, Nostok.
Cut the gun over here.
John, Mom said that maybe after she passes, people will find my journals and write a book.
Right. Right. Okay.
And Joan Hodson asks, are food traditions being preserved?
Are food traditions being preserved? It's quite meat nanos.
Mitt namn är smälten. Den mäska och pusten nu. Men den är på så mycket då ett mycket. De var tanti jobba mina våra men det gick man vet men nu ja.
Yeah, she said she for her, she said she eats everything. Like she anytime that somebody has killed, gone hunting, she's always given traditional foods. So, you know, anybody that in the community brings her partridge, rabbit, fish, and she'll clean it and, you know, have it. She doesn't eat store-bought food very much. Hardly ever.
Tshaukuesh, I'm cooking 2 wabush tonight. I have 2 wabush in the oven. Two snowshoe hare, 2 rabbits. So you have to come for supper tomorrow. Good.
And Heidi Kum says, thank you both for your presentation and for engaging with us and for your important work and devotion and advocacy and for helping to build awareness. And Bill English says, I would like to see a book with the children talking about going on the land now that they are older.
Good.
Bill saying from another was it what the Mogoma they go you while we talking about issue and the
And that is all we have for questions at this moment. If anyone else has anything they'd like to say.
Oh, I just wanted to say something. It seems to me that in Tshaukuesh's book, it shows a number of things. One, it shows how active Tshaukuesh has been through her life, and also how much traveling she did both in Nutinikiau and across the country and in Europe. And the other is the publisher, University of Manitoba Press, deserves a lot of credit for the way that they displayed the photographs and the beautiful design of the book, from the cover to the margins to the font, the print, the style of print and the size and all that kind of stuff. It's a beautiful, beautiful book. And so is Elizabeth Yeoman's book, by the way, too.
No, it's.
Can you interpret that?
Penashue's book.
Yeah. But, Kanani, would you interpret what I said to your mother about her book?
On the millions to Ejida Jamaica, Magntia, publishment, you know, and Judiat in this commodity, especially with Gisco.
Yeah. So, Chiniskimitten. Thank you. Okay.
Jenna Pineapple is with.
Good.